What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Look, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tactheratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him.
Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Muammar Gaddafi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles and Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. If you're watching us on Rockfin or Rumble or listening wherever podcasts are served, thanks a million. We appreciate the support. If you like the show, you can share it with your friends and family. We certainly support that. And if you think we've earned it, we'll take a 5-star review. It's not an ego trip, I assure you. It's an algo trip. They're rigging it against us, so let's do what we can to get it out in front of that. Hey, the new audiobook is available, The Octopus of Global Control. In audiobook format, you can go to Audible and get that there, or Amazon, iTunes. It should be out on Spotify now, so go check it out. We appreciate that. If you want to connect with me, the website macroaggressions.io is the best place to do that. Super big thanks to our sponsors. They make the show happen. We couldn't do it without them. Chemical Free Body's been with us from the beginning, and we appreciate Tim James. He makes fantastic supplements that actually work. Imagine that. What a novel idea. You can go to chemicalfreebody.com. You can read up all about it. You can find the detox bundle. I've done that. That'll lean you out in about 90 days. It's just capsules and green 85 drink. You take it every morning. It's 5 minutes and you're done. So if you have made the decision that this is the year that you're going to improve your health, you can go to chemicalfreebody.com, read up about it, see what you think. If you find something you like, the discount code is macro. And also thanks to the folks at Legal Shield. They've been in business for half a century in the United States and Canada. And it's very simple. They get you access to a high-powered attorney in your area for a reasonable price. It's $29.95 a month. It's $30 a month. You can go in there and get all of your legal documents taken care of, your last will and testament, your financial power of attorney, medical directives, all those things that you need to have and nobody really wants to spend the money on. When you sign up for Legal Shield, you'll get an app on your phone. And on that app, you just punch in what you need to talk to them about. There's a drop-down menu. All those documents will appear. Just send, this is what I need. They say, fine. Someone will call you within 24 hours to set up an appointment. You set up your appointment. You take everything in, get it done. Knock it all out. Thousands and thousands of dollars worth of legal documents taking care of you in the first month. You get that done, you will pay this thing off for the next 5 years. So do this. Go to the website that they made specific for this show. Read up about it, see what you think. If it's right for you, pull the trigger. If not, that's cool. It's www.don'tgetpushedAround.com. You can check out what they have. They have a legal plan, an ID shield, a small business plan. If you run a business that's maybe big enough to need legal counsel, but not big enough to have your own legal department, they've got a small business plan for you. If you carry a gun, they have documentation for that stuff too. It's amazing. Just go over and read up about it. Don'tgetpushedAround.com. Well, he's back, everybody. Derrick Broze. TheConsciousResistance.com is the place to go. Go join up and be a part of the Conscious Resistance Network. Ladies and gentlemen, back on the show from Houston, I'm assuming, Derrick Broze.
Hey, what's up, brother? I'm actually in Mexico right now.
Oh, you're in Mexico. I had two choices, and I guessed wrong. But can we, since I mentioned Houston, can we talk about running for mayor? Because I saw you were getting. How did that go? How was that process? Did they throw up crazy roadblocks your way, or did they let you fight a fair fight?
No, as expected, the system in Houston, which is an establishment I've been fighting for the last 14 years on police violence, fluoride in the water, 5G in the city, homelessness issues, you name it, general corruption. I've tried to make it a point in my activism. This is something I think that might set me apart from some other folks. It's like, in addition to talking about the big picture issues, geopolitics and Jeffrey Epstein or the Great Reset and all that sort of stuff, but to also have my foot in my local community, both as an activist and as a journalist. So I've been able to build some, reputation and some support as well as some hate in Houston over the decades now. And that involved, confronting the police chief, confronting the mayor, both getting known as an activist and as a journalist. And so I leveraged that in 2019 when I actually ran for mayor the first time. I leveraged that just in the interest of, for one, trying to raise awareness about 5G, which I was very heavily investigating at the time, and I was working on a documentary. And I came to find out that the previous mayor, who's now gone, was directly connected to Verizon, had received the 5G Champion Award for his work to help roll out 5G. I didn't even know such a thing existed. Yeah, and also just to kind of raise awareness that in general, Houston prior to this, and I think maybe it's still the case, has actually the strongest mayor in the United States, not the person, but the position, the way it's set up. I think Denver, Colorado is the only other city that comes close. And long story short, for those who are unaware, you typically have in the local government, you have a strong mayor or a weak mayor form of government. And there's details in there, but generally speaking, you can imagine the strong mayor form of government gives the mayor more power and the city council members a little bit less power. But in Houston, it was actually set up so that nothing can get on the weekly agenda, which is the only way to make any local change, is to have an item on the agenda, discuss it, call your council member, whatever, if you believe in representative government, and try to make changes happen. But in Houston, the mayor was the only person allowed to add items to the agenda, which obviously stacked the deck against the people. You could have thousands of Houstonians calling all 16 council members and saying, hey, we're worried about X, Y, and Z. And the council members could come to city council and say, hey, our people are talking about this. And as has happened in the past, the mayor can just say, nope, we're not listening. We're not doing anything about it. And that's that. And so that was something I was trying to raise awareness to. I ran in 2019. Successfully. And what I mean by that is I ran all the way through to the end. Obviously, I didn't win mayor. I think we got less than 1,000 votes, which I know you, Charlie, you know my work, and anybody else who knows my work. I am a voluntarist. I wasn't really running to get votes in the first place. So that wasn't really our measure of success. It was more about reaching people. And in 2019, I was able to get on all the local media, get on all the radio stations, newspapers, and say, hey, the mayor of Houston has too much power. We need to change this. Talk about 5G, talk about surveillance, talk about all these things. So it was successful in that regard. And that was prior to COVID. That was 6 months before COVID happened. And then, of course, during COVID, I was very outspoken, even though I wasn't even living in Houston anymore. I would drive back to Houston from Mexico and organize protests. And we were making the front page of the Chronicle and still, getting some attention. So I figured, all right, 2023 comes up. And I had a lot of supporters say, hey, you should do it again. I think more people will be more open to it. People will be more willing to listen to what you were talking about. Because I was also talking back in 2019, one of my planks of my mayoral campaign was that if I became mayor, we would pass an ordinance that made it so that the city could never enforce any sort of vaccine mandates. And I was mainly saying this in 2019 because of the measles stuff going on. Right. But I knew that it could be used in other ways. And it was interesting. We would have people who would be like, okay, yes, you want to get rid of surveillance. You want to decriminalize cannabis. You want to do all these things. And they would get to the vaccine thing. And that was either a make or break for them. They would either be like, oh, you're an anti-vaxxer. Never mind. I can't support you. Or they would be like, thank you so much for talking about this. So, obviously COVID happened after that. 2023 rolls around. I had some supporters come back and say, hey, we would love it if you move back to Houston and if you put your energy into this, and I think you have a chance. So that's what I did in January 2023. I went back to Houston after being in Mexico the last 3 years and moved back to Houston full time for last year, and just kind of committed like, all right, I'm going to be here and I'm going to run, knowing, of course, I have very little chance of actually winning, but knowing I can leverage my ability to communicate effectively, get on the media, get on the radio, get on the TV. And we were able to do that. We got an endorsement from the Harris County Libertarian Party. even though officially, and this is the only reason I really did it as well, another reason I did it is because in Houston, all local races are nonpartisan officially. I mean, you know who's Republican and who's Democrat for the career politicians, but I didn't have to sign any allegiance, any oaths to any party, including the Libertarian Party. They just chose to endorse me because they know what I'm about. And that was the first time ever in Houston's history that the Harris County Libertarian Party, which is the second largest county in the United States, chose to endorse anybody in the mayoral race. So I was getting endorsements. We're getting media coverage. Not only that, my idea in 2019, which I ran on, was just saying that the mayor had too much power and we should reduce it, basically make the mayor a figurehead and sort of decentralize the power and give that to council. Well, even though I didn't win in 2019, in 2020, the idea did catch on, and about 40,000 signatures were gathered of Houstonians to add that to the actual ballot so that Houstonians could vote to limit the power of the mayor and equalize it with the city council. Of course, the mayor, the 5G champion, he delayed it as long as he could, but it finally was on the ballot this past November 2023. And so I made that part of my campaign, saying, hey, look, whether you like me or not, if you're going to be involved in local politics, here's a chance. And how often do we get this chance to actually shrink government on the local level? And so it was called Proposition A, and we were pushing that as well as my campaign. And anyways, by the time the summer came, when it came time to officially file, I filed on day one. Shortly after that, I received a letter from the city's legal department telling me that even though I ran before with no issue in 2019, that they were now blocking me from running this past year because of my nonviolent felony from 2005, which is almost 20 years old now. And so even though I ran before, they used it against me. And so that kind of created a new situation where after that, I was like, all right, now I don't even know if I'm going to be able to run. We had like 30 days to figure it out before the official deadline. I got all the other candidates to sign a letter saying they approved of that they thought I should be able to run, that they thought it was bullshit. The mayor was doing this. It didn't matter. It became we made that a local issue. It got on the local media coverage, like literally down to the wire. The media is talking about are they going to let him on the ballot? Are they going to let him off? And ultimately they didn't. And instead, my battle kind of switched, and I had supporters. I have a wealthy supporter in Houston who helps with these kind of things, who said, look, if you want to sue the state of Texas to try to overturn what we think is an unconstitutional law, I'll fund it. And so, that wasn't my original purpose or my original goal, but I do have an ongoing lawsuit against the state of Texas right now, arguing that the Texas election code, which is super vague and says that if you've been finally convicted of a felony, you must be relieved of all resulting disabilities. And nobody knows what the heck that means or how you do that. Some people, I got to run in 2019. People have run in other cities in Texas successfully, but then obviously sometimes they choose to block it. So it seems like it's just up to the local bureaucrats, decision at that moment. So they kept me off the ballot. They did achieve that, but then we sort of have switched gears, and I filed a lawsuit, and I think it was October of last year. I just found out a couple of weeks ago that they denied our lawsuit, which is what we expected, and now we've filed an appeal. More than likely, it's going to go to the Texas Supreme Court, if not the U.S. Supreme Court eventually. And basically, it could, and this again, like, I don't believe in electoral politics. I did this to spread a message and get ideas out. But I met a lot of good people who are felons like me. And because I've crafted my own life outside of the matrix, like, this doesn't really affect me. Ryan at T-Lab didn't ask to do a background check, like, to see about my felonies and this and that. It's just, I've created a life where, like, the fact that I have a felony, it doesn't affect me except for when I go into the matrix and, people judge me if I'm trying to rent an apartment in the city and things like that. But I did meet lots of good people in the course of this, experiment, who are just good people in Houston on the local level. They're not anarchists. They're not listening to podcasts like this, but they care and they get actively involved. And some of them are felons who have changed their lives. And it's sort of with them in mind that I'm doing this because, if I beat this lawsuit, cool, we beat the state. That's a fun feeling, and we overturned a bad law. I don't know if I'll run again. So it's not really about me. It's just like, I'd like to beat the state of Texas. That would be a cool feeling. And if it helps people, like, there's a specific gentleman I'm thinking of. His name is Roshan Evans, who's just really a good community fighter out there who does have a felony as well. He might eventually decide the best way he can serve his community is to run for city council. And whether or not we think that's an effective system or not, I think it's better to have people like him who genuinely do care, as opposed to people who are just trying to start a political career. And so they're running for council, then they're going to run for mayor, then they're going to run for state rep, and et cetera, et cetera. And you see a lot of that. You can clearly see the people who don't care. But the last thing I'll say on that is one of the big takeaways I had from these two mayoral runs is that, for one, I think anarchists and libertarians are extremely disconnected from the average person. That yelling, F the state, taxation is theft, it doesn't get you very far outside of our circles. Like I took this on as like a challenge. Like, how can I, with my anarchist, libertarian, voluntarist principles, go into this thing and still maintain that and not sell out, but also hear what people are saying. And on the local level, people are like, my house floods, like kind of mundane things that unless you're a property owner, you're not really going to think about. My house floods, my trash isn't getting picked up on time. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, I don't even know if that's the job of the government to help you with that, but let me see what's the libertarian, non-statist way to approach this. How do we reduce government bloat? And so a lot of my campaign was like, hey, we're going to shut down as many of the government departments, the local departments that are at waste, because the city of Houston's got like a $5 billion deficit. I mean, they're just totally in debt, like all governments tend to be. So I really came in there with that mindset. Okay, let's get rid of fluoride because that'll save the city $1 million. Let's do this thing. Let's, and let's turn vacant lots into community gardens. Let's just give the lots to the communities, not spend taxpayer dollars, but say, hey, if you want to create gardens in your community, these are now yours to do what you will. All sorts of radical ideas that people were actually catching on, and some of the other candidates were stealing the ideas that I was bringing to the table, which is fine. Ultimately, if they go on, then that's great. But it showed that people were listening. And I do believe that is why ultimately they chose this time to not let me run the full election, because when they cut my legs off from under me, it was like mid-August. So you still had September, October, 2.5, almost 3 months of election time, which I would have been getting coverage. I would have been in the debates. That was the whole reason I was wanting to run, is because they have these televised debates in front of the whole city the final week of the election. And I would have qualified based on donations, based on this and that. And I learned the tricks from the first time, because the first time they said, okay, you have the right amount of money, but you don't have the right amount of donors. And so I figured all the fun things that they like to throw at you. So we were more prepared, just as you are with anything that you do more than once, you kind of gain some knowledge. So it was a fun experiment. I don't regret it. I think we reached a lot of people. I think I've pulled some of those people into my conscious resistance world now, and maybe they're waking up on a deeper level, which was part of my goal. And we did eventually, Prop A did pass. So the city council does have more power now. The mayor's lost a little bit of power. Of course, it's not playing out perfectly as we imagined. He's still trying to fight. The new mayor's trying to fight that. But nevertheless, it was just another effort to try to bring liberty to the community that I grew up in.
Proposition A and Preparation H.
Sure.
The power of government assholes. Right?
I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, it led you down that. Well, first of all, for those that are international that aren't familiar with the United States, Houston's the 4th largest city in the country, right? It's like New York, LA, Chicago, Houston. So this isn't some like podunk Texas town who has a team or something. This is a big time player in state politics, government, federal politics. If you'd have been able to get on, if you were the mayor of Houston, they would be forced to deal with you. They would have really had some issues. But one of the things that you mentioned in there, a cost-cutting measure that would have saved them $1 million, would have been to remove the fluoride from the water. And of course, this is what you've been doing for many years, but it's sort of like culminated with recently with these fluoride trials. Boy, for people that think that, the fluoride situation is just, some chemicals, I don't know, being mislabeled or maybe added to the water, it protects your teeth. That's part of it. But this is like a Venn diagram of government overreach. When you reach back into the beginning of it all, when you've got the beginning of the public relations, Edward Bernays component of this, of trying to sell an idea of sodium fluoride as being a benefit to people's teeth. You have the government overreach. You have big business getting involved, going, we've got all this toxic waste. What are we going to do with it? And finding a way. You have the scientific community. Don't question this science. We got to look at this over the last 70 years of don't question the science. The science is settled. Well, it's not settled. And so you get a little taste of everything when it comes to the fluoride topic. Can we start a little bit and just talk to us about what happened with this trial and why this was something that really resonated with you?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like fluoride's been something I've been fighting on the local level in Houston pretty much since I started this journey back in 2010. It was one of the first things I started to go to city council for. And as you said there, it's like I think in the beginning, when you first start waking up to certain topics, you just assume all I have to do is just tell people about this, just present the information, and they're going to be like, "Oh my God, I've never heard of this. Well, let's hurry up and make some changes. Like, let's get it done." And of course, you quickly discovered, no, you get laughed out of the room, you get called crazy. And I saw even back in, I think it was 2013, we started a group called Fluoride for Houston. We'd only gone to city council maybe once or twice, a group of less than 10 people showing up, starting to, voice our opposition. And within 2 or 3 meetings, representatives of the American Dental Association, the ADA, showed up to Houston to basically tell the mayor at that time, who was like, if the CDC recommends it, we're all for it. That these people aren't dentists, these people aren't medical professionals, just don't trust them, and it was at that time that I started to realize that, wow, there really is a pretty powerful lobby of business interests, as you mentioned. Also, the dental interests are a huge part of this. And then government scientists who turn a blind eye, that are very, very much afraid of the public talking about this. So instead, for the last decade, 70 years really, of fluoridation, you've had kind of patchwork of resistance where, like, this little county will fight it or vote no to not add fluoride to the water, or this city or this area, but there hasn't been a single state that has rejected it. There hasn't been, I think the biggest city is Albuquerque, New Mexico. There's a few small towns in Texas, but it hasn't happened on a major level because it's still in that realm of, this is a conspiracy theory. All of us professional, intelligent people, we all know that only crazies think fluoride's bad for you. It's clearly good for your teeth, right? So I didn't quite realize in the beginning how extensive the lobby and the efforts to prevent people from investigating this was. But I've kept my ear to the ground of fluoride fights and fluoride research just for this whole time. And in 2016, the Fluoride Action Network, which is probably the largest organization in the world, definitely in the United States, that fights these fluoride battles, helps people with local resources, and they'll send out scientists to help you if you're trying to push back, but also files lawsuits. They filed a petition with Moms Against Fluoridation, the Food and Water Watch, a couple other groups, a few different mothers who are plaintiffs, eventually plaintiffs, who just have realized over time, my child has a fluoride allergy, and being exposed to water fluoridation is causing them harm. So they filed a petition under the US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, under this law that is known as TSCA, the Toxic Substance Control Act. And so their petition was essentially saying, so first off, under TSCA, citizens are allowed, I don't like that term, but this is what the law said, citizens are allowed to petition and to provide evidence if we believe that a chemical compound, something that is currently approved or on the market, is toxic. And if you can prove that, then the EPA is supposed to act and then do some studies, do their own research with, take products off the market, ban them, change the allowable limits or things like that, right? So the Fluoride Action Network and their plaintiff and their group, they filed this petition with TSCA to the EPA. EPA denies the petition, of course, and says you have no standing. This resulted in the Fluoride Action Network then suing them and saying, hey, look, they wrongfully terminated our petition. We believe we should have a day in court. And so that was 2016, 2017. And that just process was kind of languishing in court for years. Fast forward to summer 2020, and it actually went to court for the first time in a federal court in San Francisco with Judge Edward Chen. And I was reporting on this for the Last American Vagabond for TLAV. This was, of course, COVID time, so it wasn't in person. It was all virtual. It was all Zoom. So I was just in court every day doing live tweeting, and just documenting, writing articles about what was coming out. Because as you can imagine, there's been zero mainstream coverage of this entire process for the last 8 years. I think the closest you come to mainstream is Bloomberg Law, which is not the main Bloomberg. It's like a very highly specialized, publication mainly meant for lawyers. Most people don't read it. It's also paywalled, so it's not like you can easily get that information. So there's been no coverage of this the whole time. But in 2020, we get the first evidence being presented. We get some of the scientists, the expert witnesses for the Fluoride Action Network coming into court and providing the data, the studies that they have, and some really big bombshells, which I'd love to get into here in a moment, that if we lived in a different world would be on front pages everywhere. When you see the amount of corruption, the level of corruption going from the World Health Organization to the U.S. government, Department of Health and Services, of course, the CDC, efforts to silence scientists, things like this. This was all coming out in the first kind of week or two of the trial back in 2020. But there was also studies that were currently happening at that time. One being the U.S. National Toxicology Program, the NTP, was doing a massive review, what they call a monograph, of all of the different fluoride literature that was out there and available. And they've been working on this since 2016. And so at that time in 2020, there was this talk of like, hey, they might be publishing soon. And the EPA was trying to do everything they could to delay it. So they told Judge Chen, like, hey, let's not make a ruling yet. We got this NTP study coming out soon. Let's just wait. And so that's what the judge did in 2020. He put it into abeyance or on a stay. And the thought at the time was like, this could last 6 months, maybe a year at most. Now, nothing happened in that time in terms of the study never came out. And we fast forward to 2024, the most recent trial hearings, and that's what we're going to get into today. But in that interim time is really where the crux of this whole discussion happened, because the NTP study, it never came out as we believed it would, but because of this lawsuit and because of the Fluoride Action Network being able to file open records requests, also they have the ability to do discovery, so they're able to get all sorts of documents and emails and stuff. They were able to obtain emails from the CDC's Oral Health Division, which is the dentistry at the CDC, and the Health and Human Services and a few other different departments in the U.S. government. They were able to obtain emails which show that while the NTP scientists said, hey, our study's ready to release, we're thinking May 2022, we're going to publish it on our servers, make it available to the public. And while they sent out that email notifying all the appropriate authorities, behind the scenes, those authorities at the CDC, Health and Human Services, are saying, we're never going to let this study come out. This study can't come out. And the reason that is because behind the scenes, the NTP scientists had said, in their own words, higher fluoride exposure is linked to lower IQ in children. And they go in, that's the headline there. And they go much deeper into analyzing that. But that was the crux of what they found. Obviously, that is not a conclusion that the U.S. government is prepared to allow out into the public, especially when there's this federal trial, which if the plaintiffs are found to be correct, and if their petition is found to be, standing up to the requirements of TSCA, it could very well be the end of water fluoridation in the United States. And of course, you can imagine if the United States took that step, it would have ripples all around the world. Because right now, while we're discussing this, parts of Canada are fluoridated, parts of the UK are, but both of their governments are now under discussion to fluoridate the entire country. So you can see, like, this isn't a battle that, it's not like there's a million things going on, Israel, other things, but this is something that we know is damaging people's brains, neurotoxicity. It also has impacts on the kidneys, on the liver, on the bones, like so many things. It's just damaging. And of course, this isn't like you drink a cup of fluoride and you're dead tomorrow. This is a cumulative effect. So throughout your life of drinking fluoridated water in your coffee and cooking your foods with fluoridated water and showering it and processed foods that have fluoride in it, or go to the restaurant, you can pretty much guarantee that's fluoride water unless they say it's reverse osmosis. So you got this buildup over time that does start to weaken the bones. And the study, the trial itself, though, is specifically focused on the neurodevelopment of children prenatal, so while they're in the mom's womb, and postnatal, and that is where the damage is really being done. So moms who are drinking fluoridated water while they're pregnant, and then maybe they get out and for whatever reason they don't breastfeed, they start using formula. Many of you probably are familiar with, there's fluoride added to the formula now. They got bottles of water with added fluoride for the babies. So you can see that the kids are just ingesting all this. And as some of the scientists told me in the second round, that happened here in February of this year, which was in person in San Francisco. And I was there for 2 weeks in court doing live tweeting. I got to interview 3 of the expert witnesses, 3 of the scientists, Michael Conant, who's the lead attorney for the Fluoride Action Network, and Brenda, I can't remember her last name. She's one of the mothers, one of the plaintiffs. So I got to go really deep on this. And I mean, the evidence is all there, but this is why they've been keeping it from the public's eyes, because the first round of the trial, it got put on hold. Let's wait for this study. And if it wasn't for this lawsuit and for the work of Michael Conant and his team, we would never know. We wouldn't be able to tell the public, hey, the scientists say fluoride is causing lower IQ in children. It's just that, as other emails show, that this is what the email says. It says HHS, or AASH, which is Assistant Secretary of Health, Rachel Levine / Richard Levine, depending on your take, said to put this on hold until further notice. So Rachel Levine, formerly Richard Levine, is the Assistant Secretary of Health. And they are listed in this email as the one, or at least one of the people responsible for preventing the release of this. And not only that, through the lawsuit, we've been able to obtain like a really kind of a unique look into the scientific process, because typically during the peer review process, people like you and I, average people, we don't know what takes place. We just know, we're told it's been peer reviewed and then it comes out. We don't know what was the original study and then what was changed in that peer review process. And maybe, something, was afoot. And we can see that because we got these documents that show the original study. They show these anonymous peer reviewers making comments and saying, hey, what about changing this? And then you can actually see the scientists coming back and saying, no, we're going to stand by what it said there. And throughout those documents, numerous times, the anonymous reviewers, which I should add that this NTP report has undergone 5 external reviews, which is more than any other National Toxicology Program report ever in its history. So it's already undergone numerous reviews, and they had it do another review, and it still, even today, hasn't been officially released. So the draft form of it was forced to be released as part of this lawsuit, so we have that. But officially, the National Toxicology Program still hasn't been allowed to release this with a final publication because of all this controversy. But we could see that whenever the anonymous reviewers said, why don't we change this language to sort of water it down and make it sound less strong, the scientists would say like, no, we think that this is accurate. We don't need to add in these qualifying words that they want to put in there, like could be, should, perhaps, little things like that will change the public's perception of what's being presented there. So it really is a unique case for that, for all those reasons. I would also add that this is the first time ever under TSCA that a citizen petition has made it all the way to the federal court. And this is the first time ever in a federal court where the evidence of fluoride's toxicity has been allowed to be presented in the U.S., at least. And it's the first time, because this did happen in the trial, that the EPA actually acknowledges that fluoride is causing harm. Now the discussion is just at what level. They're claiming at the currently allowable levels, it's too unclear. Okay, maybe you got some studies that are showing neurotoxicity and harm in children, but those are at these really high levels, and the closer we get to the current limits, it's less clear. So we should just, like, their solution is judge, rule against them. We'll do more studies. We'll just keep kicking the can down the road is essentially what the EPA wants.
Is this... I don't remember, because you and I were too young for this, but I'm sure we could go back and look. But what was the process for removing lead paint? Because lead paint was the thing for a while. And then at some point, people went, I don't know if this lead paint is the best thing for kids, kind of, screws with their IQ. Maybe we should get this out. That seemed like a reasonable thing to do if in fact lead paint was the culprit for lowering IQ and causing health issues. Why wouldn't they I'm sure there was a lead paint lobby. I'm sure there was somebody who was going to get upset because things were going to change and their lead paint industry was going to be put out of business. Much in the same way that maybe the people that are in the sodium fluoride industry are worried that they're going to go out of business. But who cares? At the point where you're talking about doing the job of protecting people from poisons and contaminants in their water or their environment or in their paint or wherever, that's the job of the government. Now, I understand that the government hates our guts, wants us sick, and especially wants us dumb. But why can't they just take the same path that lead paint went? Because they were able to make some traction. Nobody, as far as I remember, nobody really actually went to prison for that. So they could still kind of just throw their hands up and say, mistakes were made and move on from this. But can't we do that and get the fluoride out of the water? Is that a process that we can undertake?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned lead, actually, because this was brought up multiple times during the lawsuit, because 2 of the different expert witnesses that Fluoride Action Network presented, it is actually their scientific research that helped the EPA formulate their standards on lead and mercury. So, as you said, like in the past, the lead was in paint, was in the walls, mercury was being used in vaccines, all kinds of other places. Eventually, people came to realize like these things are harmful, and there was a process that was undertook to ban those things. And it's still not perfect. There's still lead in U.S. pipes. That's like a whole other crisis in addition to the fluoride in the water that is also dumbing people down. But I'll just read a quote because I have it right here in front of me. Michael Condit, at one point, he's the lead attorney. He said, "The observed hazard is the first type of risk, but the challenge of risk assessment is that this type of risk is rare. When the EPA decided to ban lead, we didn't have observed risk in this area, despite there being harms." And what he's saying there is that basically, whenever people were starting to realize that lead was linked to potential harms, we didn't have like conclusive hard data that said like, oh, look, this kid, licked some lead paint and now he's brain dead or something like, but there was what they call observed risk. I mean, that's the other thing too, is as far as like this trial being historic, you've got this federal judge who is clearly an intelligent guy. Like I will say, as far as the legal system goes with all its flaws, if we're going to have judges, you would want somebody to be as objective as he has been. That I never felt like, oh, he's already on the government side. This is all over and done. And he wasn't really on the Fluoride Action Network side. He shut down both sides different times, mainly the government, which was great to see. But he's trying to keep up with observed risk, point of departure, margin of exposure, all these like terms that really, if you don't know this, and I've had to kind of learn a lot of it in the process of the trial, then it's hard to even keep up with what the heck's being talked about. You're like, wait, what terminology this? And then they start saying MOD and POD and all this stuff, and you have to be able to keep up with it. And the judge would stop the trial several times and say, hold on, let's go back. Explain that to me again, until he was, seemed to have some better understanding. So I think that was interesting, but they brought up lead numerous times because they showed that, as I said, the NTP study on fluoride has been reviewed more times than anything to do with lead, more times than anything to do with mercury. And Michael Conant did a great job showing, even with the EPA's own expert witnesses, getting them to admit that the EPA had acted in the past with less evidence when it came to lead, when it came to mercury, less evidence than we have with fluoride. And so all they're basically saying is like, why not do the same process you've already done in the past instead of resisting and fighting this so hard?
Yeah, that seems like it would be a logical thing. There's a term that they used called unreasonable risk. Boy, talk about vague. How is that defined in this lawsuit with regard to how it fits with fluoride? When you're talking about an unreasonable risk, I guess we'd have to define what a reasonable risk was in order to understand what an unreasonable risk is, but they seem to use this. What does this mean to us?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, this is just another, I think that the problem with the legal system, and I'm sure folks in our audiences are aware of this term like legalese, the idea that the courts speak in a different language. They're not speaking in plain English, right? So when we hear that idea of unreasonable risk, we take those words at their base meaning and put them together. Okay, unreasonable risk. I think I have an understanding of that. But often terms in the law, in the courtroom, they're using like very specific EPA definitions or references, and they'll sit there. And this was, I definitely think, the goal of the EPA's expert witnesses, Dr. Stanley Barone being one of them, was to confuse the heck out of the judge. And so like, even with a term like unreasonable risk, try to pull it apart and say, Judge, well, we can't really quantify what does unreasonable mean. And let's get into the minutia of how do we define risk and what's the difference between risk and hazard. And this is and obviously there's got to be a process to come to conclusions, but it seemed like most of the time they were using these terms and trying to make it as confusing as possible for the judge. But overall, I mean, the term is supposed to mean what I think anybody hearing this would mean: unreasonable risk posed to the public. Like if you can find there's a risk, even if you can't, because there's a difference between risk and harm, right? Harm is like, well, you've proven beyond risk, there's actual harm taking place. So the EPA is saying, you have some studies claiming this, but look, we've got other studies claiming this. The EPA even tried to bring a study that was published in the last year that claimed that fluoride actually increases IQ points by 15, which is just insane. And I mean, the Fluoride Action Network did a great job tearing that study apart. But the point is, their job is just to try to cloud up things as much as possible and say, Judge, look, some things are saying this, some things are going the other direction. We can't prove harm. Okay, there's a certain risk there, but we don't know at which level. We could go with the World Health Organization level. We could go with the currently allowable levels. How do we decide that, Judge? I don't know. Let's just throw our hands up in the air and do nothing. So that, I think, was their strategy, their tactic. I don't think it succeeded. By the end of this, I mean, I'm a very skeptically optimistic person. And, the idea that fluoride could potentially end in the United States would be a huge thing. I'm not quite ready to say like this is 100% going to happen because we're still waiting for the judge's ruling. But I will say when I left the courtroom at the end of those 2 weeks in February, I felt a lot more confident than when it started. Like the judge repeatedly shut down the EPA, trying to just be very dismissive. The EPA attorney, young hotshot attorney, who's usually calm and collected, was all flustered and just frustrated by the end of it because he could see that the judge was not buying some of the BS that he was trying to peddle. So overall, I don't think that they succeeded. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't some other influences that might be shaping the judge's decision. And I'll just say to that, like once things wrapped up in San Francisco, the in-person stuff, the judge took several weeks to review everything. There was one more hearing online via Zoom. Some more documents were published, but now the judge has everything. He has all the expert witness testimony from the EPA and from the Fluoride Action Network. He has all their additional documents and memorandum and final closing arguments and statements. And him and his team are just going over that. We're now, in early April, we're expecting a ruling like any day now to come. I was told by Michael Connett, the lead attorney, that he's expecting a ruling by mid-April. And I should be interviewing him right as that happens. But that's kind of where we're at now, is like the judge is trying to navigate all the terms and terminology and the graphs and the conflicting expert witness statements. And to me, just kind of an aside on this, Charlie, is that I've written about this in some of my articles about this and COVID and other things, that I really think we are just at a time where they have their experts and we have our experts. And there really isn't, I don't know if there's a way around that, because anybody who was just totally new to this subject and just went to the courtroom and said, okay, I want to hear both sides. They would hear the Fluoride Action Network attorneys and be like, oh my God, I can't believe this is, how are people letting this happen? And then they would hear the EPA, maybe they're cross with some of those witnesses or the EPA's own witness, and essentially try to just downplay or counter everything that was said and leave that person saying, okay, well, maybe fluoride isn't that bad. Maybe these studies aren't as strong as we thought, and probably just come away confused as heck by the end. But it's just another one of these areas that I realize, I'm in a courtroom and there's 3 expert witnesses over here who have all the credentials and the letters next to their name and doctor this. And then you have 3 expert witnesses on this side who have the exact same thing, the credentials, and some of them went to the same school, some of them worked together. But clearly somebody's wrong here. And it's either that these scientists who are against fluoride, we could say maybe they're just trying to make a name for themselves. And so they figured joining an unpopular cause that's labeled a conspiracy would somehow, better their career or something, which actually it does the exact opposite. A lot of these people have lost jobs and lost standing and stuff. Or what seems more likely, the EPA witnesses who are, in the words of Dr. Philippe Grandjean, who was an expert witness for the plaintiffs, are rent to lab coats and who just get brought in. One of which, it was brought up during the testimony, was being paid $500 an hour just to be there. So, it's up to us to decide. I think in this case, it's clear, which side has industry influence and stuff, but it's just, to me, another example of how, no matter what, I don't know if I think our reality has just been fractured. I don't think we're ever going to be able to get, and maybe we never did. Now the internet has just made it more clear that we can't all agree on basic facts and things. But I just find that interesting that, there's their experts, trust who you will, I guess.
Yeah. During the course of this trial, were they ever able to quantify what this did to IQ in terms of actual IQ points? Or was that sort of more of a sliding scale that was dependent on exposure and subjective, or were they able to say this is good for 3 to 5 IQ points or something like that?
So Dr. Philippe Grandjean, who is a Danish scientist, he is from the University of Southern Denmark. He, I think, is probably one of the key witnesses. During my interview, he did mention specific IQ points. I'm seeing if I can find it. It's probably in my articles at TLAV. But as far as, that's kind of the difficulty, right? Is like, for one of the discussions being had was, we're discussing water fluoridation, right? And so water fluoridation is only one source of fluoride, though. Fluoride is also in pesticides. So if you were near anybody spraying pesticides, you might be consuming it. Then I mentioned processed foods. Typically, any canned goods that have water in them, that's going to be fluoridated water. Just processed foods in general, you can see water on the ingredients. Again, that's probably made of fluoridated water 99 out of 100 times. There's the shower, there's all these different exposures, but the EPA were trying to keep the judge exclusively focused on water fluoridation exposure. So this is part of the difficulty of calculating, what you're talking about. Like, how can we conclusively say 1 glass of fluoride equals X amount of IQ points lost or something, right? It's difficult. Dr. Grandjean has attempted to do that work, and he talked about some of that. He believes that it's as much as 10 IQ points lost per, I think, 2 liters of fluoride. It's in our interview. I don't want to misstate him, but I encourage people to go check out the interview that I did with him and Dr. Howard Hu, and some of the other expert witnesses, because they really lay it out. And the point here is that the public is being lied to. First off, that fluoride is even harmful. We're told that it's totally safe, drink it, It's going to go through all your organs inside your body. There's no harm. We know that that's not true. Studies have been saying this. Even, through this lawsuit, I thought I was pretty well versed in fluoride, but I definitely learned a lot about this. Dr. Grandjean actually spoke about how back in the 1930s, there was a Danish scientist named Kai Roham who went to Greenland, and there's these mines for, I think it's called cryolite, where the workers are there mining cryolite, and as part of the cryolite mining, fluoride is released into the atmosphere and into the air. And so this guy, Kai Roham, back in 1930s, goes there, he studies them, he does x-rays. He's basically the first person to discover skeletal fluorosis, which is a side effect of fluoride poisoning, where your bones become so hard, but at the same time, they're extremely brittle. So he did x-rays, and he said, like, people's chests were like marble. You couldn't even see through them. And this was coming from the high exposures to the workers of fluoride, and it was affecting their central nervous system. He wrote a book about this in 1937 describing this whole thing. So the information has been out there for a long time. You can go back. I've been working on some videos called The Fluoride Whistleblowers that I'm going to be doing pretty soon to just bring more of this history out, because you can go back to the 90s, and there was EPA scientists. This even made the Washington Post at the time. You can find the old archives of the articles. There was scientists back then in the 90s trying to speak out when they were finding evidence of fluoride's harms. You have the National Research Council report that came out in 2006, almost 20 years ago, and that led to this NTP report that I'm talking about. So this data isn't new. Like, this information has been out there. These people, so to just, that's what makes it, I guess, all the more infuriating to be in the courtroom and hearing these hotshot attorneys and government scientists playing totally ignorant, doing everything they can to downplay any impacts on children. And meanwhile, there's mountains of data. And I'm not saying every study that has been done since the 1940s is a strong study. Obviously, there's been more recent data, but you would think if they're going to act with this uncertainty principle, which was brought up many times, this is the idea that that whenever you're supposed to act, like, for example, with lead and mercury, you don't wait till you show, hey, we have clear harm at 0.5 milliliters per liter or whatever. When you recognize there's harm, you want to avoid the most vulnerable populations. Let's say, in this case, people who already have kidney issues on dialysis and stuff. Like, fluoride coming through their system is just going to poison their kidneys and their liver even further, right? So you want to act in favor of the most vulnerable populations using this uncertainty factor. And apparently the EPA has done this in every other prior review of toxins, where they apply an uncertainty factor of 10 times. So that means, like, if you can find some harm at this certain level, you would multiply that by 10 and say, hey, look, there's probably a greater risk that we're not accounting for even before the levels that we're able to measure, right? And so that's what they've done in the past. That's what the Fluoride Action Network was arguing for this time. This is what the expert witnesses were saying. Hey, I've worked on this stuff. I've worked on neurotoxicity reviews for lead and mercury. This is not how it's been done in the past. The way that we're treating fluoride is completely out of step with even the corrupt EPA's past efforts. And as I mentioned, there were scientists back then in the 90s trying to blow the whistle, and they were run out. They were pushed out. Some of them, I think, still work for the CDC and for the FDA, other U.S. government departments, but have chosen to, I guess, go silent over the years and no longer speak up about it. But this is, I think, why it's such an important case, because right now, as we're having this conversation, as the judge is sitting there going through all the documents, trying to make a decision, millions of people are drinking fluoride right now. Millions of mothers are drinking fluoridated water. And as Dr. Howard Hu told me, the danger is that as the baby is in the mother, of course, is, tiny forming in the placenta, all that stuff's going in through the mom's body, straight into the placenta, straight into the blood-brain barrier. So as we get to the third trimester, where the baby starts to form its skeletal structure, one of the things we know about fluoride is it stores in the bones, as I talked about with skeletal fluorosis, right? So it's storing in the bones of the mom. You get to that third trimester, this is where the baby starts to form its own skeletal structure. But as we know, everything the baby has comes from its mother. So when it's starting to pull calcium out of the mom's bones to start forming its skeletal structure, it's also pulling all that fluoride that has displaced the calcium in the mom's bones straight into the baby from birth as it's forming its skeletal structure, straight through the blood-brain barrier. And this is leading to measurable loss of IQ points, as well as probably skeletal issues, bone issues, thyroid issues. And we could go on and on about some of the problems that some of these doctors told me. And that's why I think this is so important. That's why I felt it was worth going to San Francisco for 2 weeks. And trust me, being in San Francisco is not my favorite place to be. But it was worth it. And this is why I'm talking to you about it, Charlie, because this is still not enough people know about this. We still don't have the ruling yet. We're hoping and praying it's going to go the right way. But this is just another crime against the people of the world, not just America, because I said there's people contemplating doing this elsewhere as this trial is going on, as this evidence of neurotoxicity is being presented. Other governments are saying, you know what, let's start adding it to our water.
Yeah. You mentioned the American Dental Association. What was their role in this whole thing? Like, I'm curious what the sales pitch was to them 70 years ago that made them so sure that they needed to add this to toothpaste, and it was good. We have fluoride rinses and all of this stuff. They must have gotten some study a long time ago that set their mind at ease, or maybe they were just in on it too, which is possible. But they said, "Oh yeah, this is a good idea. Let's add." The option is do nothing, but we're going to actively add it to our. It's not like, oh, fluoride's we just find it naturally in toothpaste and we'll remove it. No. You're specifically adding it to the toothpaste. What sort of information, what sort of studies were they going off of to justify this comfort level in suggesting fluoride to their customers for, I don't know, forever, 70 plus years?
Yeah, well, you mentioned Edward Bernays earlier. He definitely, for those who don't remember him, father of modern propaganda, social engineering in a lot of ways. He was involved in the early efforts to work with the ADA to propagandize the public into thinking that fluoride was safe. There was an experiment in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was one of the first places that they started doing fluoride, and they did a very quick study. Well, it's kind of a bigger history, but I'll just give the short version of it. As you mentioned, sodium fluoride, also hydrofluorosilicic acid is the other name for fluoride. These are byproducts of phosphate mining, largely based in Florida. One of the companies, Mosaic Co., is still very active. There's a couple others. And back in the day, it was Alcoa, the aluminum industry. And they were realizing that they had this toxic substance. There was numerous incidences where I think they're called washers or scrubbers at the top of the pipes are supposed to catch all the toxins so they don't go out into the air. And there were some mistakes that happened. So fluoride goes out into the atmosphere, and this is in Jersey and a few other places. All these farmers report that their cattle just fall over and die. Their chickens, their crops just start dying. And there was lawsuits. There was talk of lawsuits getting ready to take place. Some of these farmers made the connection like, hey, something's going on with this plant over here. And so while that's going on, the ADA and other elements of the government realized that they need to get some studies together pretty quickly to start trying to preemptively debunk any claims that might be made in these lawsuits. And actually, I found some reporting that one of the best books on this is The Fluoride Deception by Christopher Bryson. He's a journalist who was mainstream and then kind of woke up to this and wrote this really amazing book, kind of diving into this history. And he actually talked to some of the descendants of the farmers, and they said they were paid like a couple $100s in the end to shut them up. And yeah, I guess a couple $100 back in 1940, something might have been worth, a little bit, but still, obviously, in the big picture of things, it's not worth much. And so the government started getting together studies. They did a program in Grand Rapids. They, did some really shoddy work and said, look, hey, based on this, we now can see that fluoride lowers cavities in the rural areas, because that was the whole argument, is that the people in the cities, they got access to dentists and stuff, and they got more money, but our poor rural folk are, having bad teeth, and in order to help them, we need to be adding fluoride to the water, and that way, even the poorest people among us who might not be able to afford dentist care or get toothpaste can still have it and wash it over their teeth and can get all the benefits. Now, they never look beyond that. It was just done very quickly to defend them in these lawsuits that they were anticipating. And then since then, there have been more conclusive studies. And actually, probably the biggest picture that deserves a whole nother podcast that maybe we can do another time is looking at the connection between the Manhattan Project and the studies on nuclear power and other, including fluoride and other elements, directly connect to the fluoride history, because it was in those studies of the Manhattan Project, and they're looking at exposing people to radium and exposing them to fluoride, that they started to realize, like, okay, there's some negative impacts of this substance we call fluoride. So it's really a much deeper and darker history that has a lot of the usual names. If you go back to that time period, you start seeing some of the same folks who've been involved in other crimes and other cover-ups in areas like that. And so it's been shoddy science since the beginning. And then after that, maybe about a decade or two later, I don't quite remember. I actually have never seen it, but when Dr. Strangelove came out, it kind of got it in the public's mind that only crazy weirdos are the kind of people that are like, oh, there's poison in the tap water, they're dumbing us down. So they really did a number between like getting some fake crappy studies together, getting Edward Bernays to work with the ADA to start promoting it everywhere, that this is the best thing since sliced bread, and then using media through movies like that. And then, of course, the term conspiracy theory to just essentially wear people down and get to the point where people are just, I assume like, oh yeah, obviously if government's doing it, it must be safe. And we're kind of at this point, as I said, before this lawsuit, where you just had a patchwork of cities and municipalities trying to fight back and push back where they can.
You mentioned Manhattan Project. It made me think. I spent every summer as a kid in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I would fly in. And when you fly in, one of the first things you would see is this massive Alcoa sign there. And my grandfather worked at Oak Ridge during during all of that stuff.
Wow.
And so when you go Manhattan Project, I go, okay, Oak Ridge, Alcoa in the same area. I don't know.
It's all connected. It's definitely connected for sure.
It feels like, so what happens if the trial in San Francisco goes a positive direction and the judge comes back and says, look, this is actually dangerous. You guys over there at the EPA and the ADA you guys have your scientists, and you can pay them to say the science is settled. We just went through 4 years of that. We know how easily you can buy a scientist. So the judge comes back and says, we've got a problem here with fluoride. What can he do out of San Francisco? Is that something where it starts regionally there, and then they use that as the precedent to then start attacking nationwide? Or does this have the ability to go even further up and make this some sort of federal case? Like, how does it all work?
So this is a federal trial. This is for the entire United States. So it's not just for San Francisco. That just happens to be the district that the trial was filed in. But yeah, so if the judge does rule that the plaintiffs have effectively proven fluoride is a neurotoxin as required under TSCA, then he would say, throw it back into the EPA's court. And basically under TSCA, there's 6 options of what they can do according to the law if this happens, but only 2 of them apply in this case. And that would be either obviously outright banning it and just saying like, hey, no more fluoride in the water, or trying to lower it a little bit more, which would obviously be, a victory, but less satisfactory because it's still poisoning people at just a slightly less degree. But it's not going to be immediate. And I did ask this to Michael Conant in our interview. Folks can go check that out because, obviously, like I say, this could be the end of water fluoridation in the U.S., but don't expect it to happen mid-April. Like, this is still going to be bureaucratic, slow government, legal garbage. Like, so the judge is going to say, all right, EPA, it's back in your court. They are correct. You have two options. You can ban it or you can regulate it further or lower it. And then it goes back to like an EPA committee from as far as I can understand. And I don't know how long does that process take, right? Like how long is there I don't know if the law specifies, okay, once this step happens, the EPA meets for a month, 30 days, 6 months, a year, who knows, right? They could delay that process, obviously, as long as they like. We can also expect that the EPA is going to appeal the decision one way or the other. And so that appeal, I was told, won't take like a couple of years like this. It would take 6 months or less than a year. But there will be appeals by the EPA. If they lose, then obviously this goes forward and then it goes to the committee, as I was just describing. If the EPA wins, the Fluoride Action Network has already said they plan to appeal and continue to fight, of course. So this isn't going to be over this month, unfortunately. But if it does go in our favor, it will already, just with that ruling, send a message. Federal court in the United States finds that fluoride is a neurotoxin. Like, that's the headline. Let's get that out everywhere as far as possible. Let's get all the people who've called us crazy for talking about this to apologize. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But, this would still have ripples, and I think that's what makes it important. The other thing, I kind of mentioned a few of the things that make this a really unique case. The other one is that typically judges are not asked to judge science. And I would assume that probably the scientists hate that. Like, the last thing they want is some judge in some courtroom second guessing them, especially if they know they're up to some shady science incorporated. But, and as I mentioned earlier, the judge has had to like pause and say, hold on, okay, explain that to me again, like slow down a little bit and tell me. So it's really unique in the sense that judges and courtrooms in science don't usually intersect and mix. Like, this doesn't usually happen. So this judge has an opportunity now, having been given a multi-year education on fluoride and the toxicity assessment that the EPA uses, and hearing from 8 different scientists at this point from both sides, it's up to him now to decide if he thinks they've conclusively proven their case. And I think they definitely have. And Charlie, if you don't mind, I'd actually like to quote 2 of the scientists to you, because I think there's just two points that are tied into some of the overall case. The first one is from the Dr. Granjin that I mentioned, and he came to the U.S. from Denmark just for this trial. And I got to interview him about all different things related to like the health aspect. But there was something he said in 2020 when we were just doing it via Zoom that really stuck with me. Back in 2020, in the first phase, he said that somebody at Harvard, because he worked for Harvard, he said that somebody at Harvard threatened him about his research into fluoride. And then he also kind of just casually mentioned that the fluoride lobby had influenced and exerted influence into the fluoride research at the World Health Organization. And so when I got to meet him in person, I asked him, like, can you elaborate on what do you mean by this? And this is exactly what he told me regarding Harvard. He said, quote, "A professor from Harvard University came to my office and asked me to sign a statement that my work on fluoride had nothing to do with water fluoridation. He actually wrote this draft, and since I didn't sign this immediately, he instead went to my dean and had the dean sign a statement saying that he supported water fluoridation in accordance with the policy of the CDC. Grandjean told me that the leadership at Harvard, he wouldn't give me any names, but he said that the leadership at Harvard had decided that his research on fluoride was unwanted and that had never been approved by Harvard. So he said, quote, "Because we couldn't agree on what I would consider my academic freedom, I left Harvard." And then when I asked him, like, okay, can you elaborate on what is the fluoride lobby at the World Health Organization? He said that back in the mid-2000s, he had been invited to help the World Health Organization develop a environmental health criteria document on fluoride. So he starts gathering data, animal data, epidemiological studies, and putting together a draft report. And then he noticed that changes were made to his draft report. And he said, quote, "They inserted changes in my draft indicating that fluoride could perhaps be toxic, but only at immense concentrations. I protested and said that in accordance with the scientific data, it would be wrong to insert the word immense. And so the WHO published a document without my name because I'd asked to have my name stricken, but then they inserted some other colleague's name as the author of the draft, which is of course erroneous. But that was what the WHO felt was necessary in order to protect the interests of water fluoridation."
Jesus.
So that's like, to me, like, again, like if we had a responsible corporate mainstream media, things like that from this doctor worked at Harvard. He's got all the things that we're told matter, all the experience and expertise and criteria. Has been doing this for 60 years, and is well reputed. His work on lead, his work on mercury, it stands the test of time. The EPA still uses his work for those hazard assessments. And here he is saying that he left Harvard because of corruption going on with fluoride, that the fluoride lobby has influenced and kind of got some control over the WHO. And that's not surprising to anybody who paid attention to COVID, but it's just another example of how this stuff goes. And so then whenever an average person goes up and looks right now on the CDC website, and it still says that water fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century, and they're going to just be dismissive. But you have a doctor here who's got all the credentials we're told matter, trying to share his story, and unfortunately he's not as vocal as I hoped he would be or wish he would be, but still he shared it with me. I'm trying to put it out there, and these are the kind of things that the public doesn't hear and doesn't know about.
I remember growing up having this image in my head of Harvard as being like, that's where you will go if you're really smart. Now it's Claudine Gay, Lawrence Summers, Jeffrey Epstein, and Martin Nowak. That's what I think of when I say Harvard. I mean, what a disgusting place for people. You would think that the pursuit of the truth would be at their core, but you'd be wrong about that. For Harvard, you'd be wrong about that for the FDA, the American Dental Association, the American Medical Association, the federal government in general, the CDC, all of these groups. If I didn't know any better, I would think that they were actively working against us, trying to keep us stupid, or make us stupid in the first place, and then keep us that way. And it seems very diabolical. It seems like a lot of work to go through, a lot of cover up, a lot of fake studies, a lot of threats, in order to keep this fluoride gravy train going. And listen, if if we understand that this is a neurotoxin that lowers IQ, and these groups, these institutions, including and especially our government, are fighting desperately to keep it in the water supply, you have to make if you even can make the calculation anymore because you've been so dumbed down by the fluoride, but if you could make the calculation, you would say, if I didn't know any better, I'd think the government wants to keep me stupid. And unfortunately, I don't see anything to make me feel otherwise. Do you?
I mean, I used to push back on people saying this, that fluoride and other things are in the water to dumb us down. Obviously, people like Alex Jones have said for years, you've got the slow kill methods, the vaccines, the poison in the food, the water and stuff like that. And I generally agree with that, but I've always kind of felt like, all right, maybe maybe that's a little too far. We don't quite have the evidence. But after going to the trial and everything that I hear from the scientists, and then seeing the EPA scientists themselves do their best to sort of downplay these harms, which are being proven in study after study, it's hard not to say that, yes, there is clearly an effort to try to dumb down the public. And just to add to that, Charlie, this is the last quote I wanted to share. This is from the EPA's own scientist who was their expert witnesses. He was actually an expert witness for both sides, which was sort of interesting, but they both thought that he had something to say. Then this is Dr. Stanley Barone, senior science policy advisor with the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. He has done 10 risk assessments with the EPA under TSCA. So he is seen as like the expert on how this is done. And of course, he was there trying to downplay the connection to fluoride and neurotoxicity. But Michael Conant, for one, got him to agree that he said, yes, that fluoride has been found to be a neurotoxin at certain levels. But again, this is where the debate starts. At what level? Michael Conant said, you agree that there is an association of neurotoxicity with water fluoridation above levels of 2 milligrams per liter. And he said, and this is kind of an example of how they answer, at some level above 2, yes. It's like they don't want to just say yes, it's like at some level, I guess. So then, so they're arguing like at what level, where does it start? But there was this really key moment where Michael Conant is questioning Barone, and Michael Conant is a brilliant attorney. He's just drilling into them and finding their weaknesses. And they're talking about the kidney's ability to excrete toxins like fluoride. And Michael Conant makes the point that individuals who are suffering from kidney issues, as I mentioned earlier, people on dialysis, they have a lot more difficult time to excrete fluoride because it builds up in the body, it builds up in the kidneys. And so Michael Conant says, quote, you testified earlier today that there may be oversaturation going on in the kidney at the 95th percentile level in fluoridated areas. Do you feel comfortable as a risk assessor exposing pregnant women to a level of fluoride that is so high that the kidney is oversaturated? Which to me is just like, he drilled in on God, like put it right there on the record. And I'm sitting in the courtroom, and I think 5 to 6 seconds passed before he said anything. The whole courtroom goes silent. After he asked that, Barone's just standing there like, he didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to respond. I'd say 5 to 7 seconds of silence before he kind of gave, again, a qualified no, saying, I'm not okay with that. But then at the end, he said, but my opinion is not germane to the discussion. It's like, dude, you're there as an EPA hazard assessment expert witness, and you're just like, well, my opinion doesn't matter. It does. But I mean, that alone, and unfortunately, we were told there was going to be the recordings would be released, but the EPA is also fighting that. They don't want the recordings of the trial to come out, because I want, if we ever do get them, that moment, I think it's such a powerful moment of just how direct the question was. Are you comfortable with knowing that pregnant women are going to be exposed to levels of fluoride that potentially could oversaturate their kidney? And then the EPA's risk assessment expert just sitting there in silence, staring off into space for a good 5 to 7 seconds before he gives a bullshit answer. Like, it was such a disturbing but classic moment in the hearings.
Well, it's par for the course too. Just paid liars, whether they're on a television screen or on a witness stand. If you've got enough money and government coercion, you can find somebody to say whatever you want them to say. It'll be interesting to see how this thing plays out, because it's a really important topic that doesn't get a ton of play in the mainstream media. It's been so normalized that if you go to the dentist and they say, would you like a fluoride rinse? And you say no, you feel like they're going like, oh, you're one of those. Well, yeah, I am one of those. Yeah, you caught me. I'm one of those guys that reads. Yeah, how dare I? What's next for you? This is a big one. I mean, this has been a big one. This has been consuming of your life. I know you're going to follow it, but what do you have cooking in the future?
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. So, of course, as soon as we get the ruling, I'll be going live right away and doing some articles and coverage, and I'll be interviewing Michael Conant, the lead attorney, as soon as we find out. And I'm actually writing a book about this too, about the fluoride lawsuit. That's going to be one of my goals for this year. And it's not going to be, the goal with that is not to be a dry facts of here's what happened on day one, here's what happened on day two. I'm actually going to try to do a little challenge of myself, and it's going to be written more in the true crime narrative fashion. I've interviewed all the different people involved, and I've got a lot of the facts, and I want to really tell a story that says, like, what motivates this mother to be a part of a lawsuit to sue the federal government, and what's her story? And of course, tell the story of what happens, wherever the case eventually goes. But instead of it just being like a dry reading court transcripts, I want it to be more about the people, like what motivated Michael Conant to become an attorney. Because Michael Conant, his father and mother, Paul and Ellen Conant, they founded the Fluoride Action Network. Their family's been fighting fluoride for like 30 years altogether so there's quite a story there. And so I'm going to be working on that. And in terms of next projects, I'm just like you're working on your octopus project. I'm coming to the conclusion of The Pyramid of Power, which is my 17-part documentary series people can find at thepyramidofpower.net. We just released 13 of the episodes so far. Later this month, we should be releasing chapter 14 on the false flag deception. And for those who are not familiar, I basically try to take all the previously available books and documentaries that, okay, this is the best book on 9/11 or the best book on this topic, and here's a great documentary, and source that information as well as my own original research, condense these topics down to the goal at the beginning was 30 minutes or less, and we've succeeded on 90% of them. The intelligence agencies was an hour long because you can't really shrink that down. But the idea being that I'm going to take the best works plus my own original research, make it less than 30 minutes so it's it's bingeable for the Netflix generation, and end each episode with solutions. Like, hey, we're talking, the first one was establishment media, big education, big wireless. We go through each of these pieces of the puzzle that I believe kind of form this pyramid of power. And every episode ends with some suggested solutions, as well as, hey, if you want to learn more, read this book, watch this documentary. It features James Corbett, Richard Grove, Mark Passio, so many other people. We got to get you in there for probably the final episode, because the final episode is going to be answering the question where I'm going to present all kinds of perspectives of, well, who or what is at the top of this pyramid. And I'm going to go from everybody who says, hey, it's this specific group or this specific religion, or maybe it's aliens, or maybe it's this. And then we'll present all that, and as well as my own data. And so we just finished a crowdfunding campaign for that to finish these final 4 episodes. I just hired a new editor. I'm happy to say this entire project has been crowdfunded. We've raised over the last 3 years $38,000, which is still a small budget for doing a film series as big as we're working on here. My editors just are working for less pay than they make elsewhere, I'll say, because they believe in this project. And I'm taking no pay, but the goal in the long term, once we get this out by the end of this year or early next year, is USB drives loaded with all 17 episodes, with all the original interviews, with all the source material, and maybe DVD sets. And it'll probably become a project that I promote for the rest of my life. And then I'm going to turn it into a book as well. So a lot of my energy right now is just going to working on the book for the fluoride lawsuit and completing the next scripts, because I do all the research, write the scripts, and I do all the narration for the Pyramid of Power, and then I send it to my editors and they make it look beautiful so people actually want to watch it. So those are the kind of focuses, my big focuses for the rest of this year.
We need, so if you're listening to this and you've got more time than money, share the hell out of this, right? Share the information, spread the word. If you've got more money than time, if you're somebody that's fortunate from a financial standpoint, and you want to sprinkle a little bit of that around to people, the alternative media, we get choked off. There's just no money flowing there. So you can make it rain in the desert. If you want to support Derrick's work, you can go to theconsciousresistance.com, become a part of the Conscious Resistance Network, and support his work there. What's the best place to find you, social media wise, online, if people want to do that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you again, Charlie, for having me on. I'll just mention as well, theconsciousresistance.com, if you want to sign up for our email list and you get plugged into our world. If you do have extra to sprinkle on us, support Charlie, support myself and everybody else, theconsciousresistance.com/invest. Probably these days, the best place to follow me if you want like all of my stuff, from random thoughts to articles I'm reading to my actual content, probably would be Twitter or Telegram. But I post my videos on, Rockfin, BitChute, Odyssey, all the usual places. Post all my stuff on Spotify and other podcasting platforms like yourself. So if you search Derrick Broze or The Conscious Resistance, you're more than likely to find me on whatever platform you're on.
That's Derrick Broze, everybody. He's doing outstanding work. Please consider supporting him. And if you like this episode, you can do the logical, reasonable, rational thing. Share it with your friends and family. If you've got that aunt that's been giving you a hard time about fluoride, send her this episode. Have her take a listen to another voice, another side of the coin, as it were. And if you want to connect with me, macroaggressions.io. That's the best place to do that. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you again soon.